The American educational system can be able to trace its origins back to the Common School movement. The Common School movement had a simple philosophy. It believed that one of the best things American society could do for itself is to allow access to quality education to the largest number of people. Now, it wouldn't be until the 1960s that America made good on this promise. After Brown versus Board of Education came down, desegregating American public schools, allowing black and brown kids access to education, or so it seemed. Since then, there have been persistent racial disparities between the achievements of black and brown students comparative to their white peers, and educators are running short on answers on how we can effectively close this gap. Which leads me to the thesis that I'm here to speak to you today about. I believe that we should allow ethnic studies courses to become a new requirement in high school curriculum. The first place we're going to talk about is exactly why or what the benefits are for such a course of action. Second, we're going to look at possible places that can be used as models for such an idea. And then lastly, we'll discuss the opposition to an idea. But first, you might be asking yourself why exactly I suggest making ethnic studies courses a requirement to help close the achievement gap between black and white students. Well, data, of course. A study done by Stanford examined the differences in achievement between black and brown youth who enrolled in ethnic studies courses at their high school comparative to black and brown students who were not. They found that the gains were remarkable. In fact, there was a 21% increase of attendance for all classes reported by students enrolled in such a program. GPA went up on average 1.4 points, a letter grade and a half. And then lastly, they had found that students on average completed 23 more credits than their peers who were enrolled in no such courses. So clearly we can be able to see that there are substantial gains that black and brown students get from exposure to such a course. You might be wondering why is after everything that's been tried, would a class be the thing to solve the problems of students not being able to do well in their other classes? The reason for that comes back to esteem. Now, esteem is important. This is something that educators have known for a while, though over the last few decades, cognitive science has started to back up a little bit more firmly. Esteem plays a role in how much students learn. For if a student doesn't believe that they can learn, they will not. In the case of black and brown students, they internalize negative stigmas from society, media, and adults around them that tell them that they can't learn, that they're unintelligent, or that on average their white peers will just do better than they can when it comes to school. This sort of stigma internalizes itself and is expressed or manifested in the grades of these students and in their work habits as well. When students have exposure to ethnic studies courses, they're able to have a healthier development of their racial identity, one that allows them and inspires them to achieve instead of having to be their cross to carry. But Stanford isn't the only place that's preaching of such a path. We can also look at a different study conducted by the NEA, the National Educators Association, that shows gains as well. They found that students who were enrolled in ethnic studies courses had increased engagement in all of their classes, had better math scores than did than before when they enrolled, and also reported twice the gains in reading achievement. It is pretty safe to say that these classes have a positive effect on students' learning outcomes. But then the question becomes, what exactly do we model such a new system after? Well, I believe that there are a few models that we can look to in the status quo. First, there are 3 school districts in the state of California that already require ethnic studies courses to be part of their curriculum. Also, in the state of Texas, they have now made ethnic studies a normalized optional class, so it's an elective for them, but one taken seriously. And later next month, the state school board will even have a textbook for the class be up. But still, even though Texas has 1.4 million students, they only have a reported 40 kids enrolled in their ethnic studies courses. Though both of these are programs that are innovative and I'd like to give attention to, they're both share the flaws of being too new and too small to be used as an actual model. A better model can be traced back to Arizona, who a few years ago made ethnic studies classes a normal and required part of their curriculum. Now, the Arizona experiment showed the same thing that Stanford and NEA had proven with their studies, that students would achieve better after exposure to such a course. Um, Now, the Arizona's classes ran with a couple of normal activities. For one teacher that I saw, she would have a quote from a Chicana writer, a poet that they'd start every day: "If I do harm to others, I do harm to myself." And that'd just be a quote that they'd go over as like a bell ringer. And then they would have different activities every day. Some of the activities included they would write about disenfranchisement or poverty. They would analyze culturally relevant music and rap to be able to talk about their deeper meanings. And they'd allow students to have deeper ponderings on the history that they were taught. Students would be allowed to engage with it more. The teachers were encouraged to teach from non-white perspectives as well. So lessons on manifest destiny wouldn't be just about the expansion of the United States into the West and the Great Gold Rush, but rather what happened to the people, the Native Americans living there who were displaced, what happened to the people who owned the territory beforehand, who were later found no longer to be in possession of that land. These courses had real substantial conversations with students, had educational benefit. It was something that kids felt passionately about. When a school board was moving to make their version an elective, students went to a local school board meeting, chained themselves to desks, and chanted, "What do we do when education's under attack? We fight back." These classes were, from most teaching perspectives, something that teachers would dream about having, something that would not only make kids work hard in their classes, but work hard in other classes and support education as a whole. And I believe that taking some of these activities and using them in other classrooms can lead us to the same results, but the same positive effects. But Arizona did have flaws. There was a strong vein of backlash that eventually came down, which leads us to my final point. What are the oppositions to such a course of action? So we've already been over how data has shown from respected educational groups that ethnic studies courses can be able to help students. And we've seen models speaking about Arizona, how they did it at a statewide level, and some of the activities they did in class. However, Arizona's story ended sadly. After they had gotten a new superintendent of schools in one of their districts, John Harpenthal, he pushed the legislature to pass something called HB 2281, which was a bill banning ethnic studies courses in classrooms, stating that they taught racial hatred, and they wanted to stop that. Now, this was kind of proven to be ridiculous. Several civil rights groups are currently suing the law. There are student protesters and educational protesters talking about First Amendment rights that are being stifled from this. But this does show an important point. When teaching classes about race at the high school level, where it's so close to the public, tensions, especially in certain areas, can boil pretty high from the community. And backlash like this is a strong possibility. However, I believe that we as educators have a responsibility to push forward regardless of such backlash. There are certain subjects that should be taught in schools. There was once a time where people would be upset that one man would dare to teach the public that the earth was not the center of the universe, but instead the sun was. He fought for what was truth. He fought for the general education of the public. And I believe that's something that we have to do now. We know that these courses can be better for our students. It is our responsibility to make sure that we give a quality education, not just to the students whom doing so is convenient, but doing so for all. For that is what our schools were built to do from the beginning.